The Galactic Empire recorded its history in stone, metal, and blood. Every conquest, every subjugation, every civilization bent to its will was etched into the grand archives of the core worlds. It was an empire that had known war, crushed rebellion, and rewritten the fate of entire species. But among all its records, there was one event that was whispered, not spoken. One cautionary tale that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened strategists. The day the human women stopped being nice. High Chancellor Vexorum, master of 1,000 battlefields, strategist of the Unification Wars, sat in the heart of the Imperial Citadel, listening to the trembling voice of his aide. The vast holographic display before him pulsed with warnings. Ships lost, stations compromised, key figures eliminated. A rebellion was expected, eventually, but not like this. Not with this precision, this silence. The humans had always been adaptable, cunning in their own crude way, but their women, if anything, they had been the quiet ones. Diplomats, caretakers, record-keepers, soft-spoken in council meetings, compliant in negotiations, subservient in military affairs. The Empire had made a fatal mistake. They have taken control of the Epsilon Armada, the aide stammered, voice raw with disbelief. We lost the fleet without a single battle, Chancellor. The ships turned on us as if they were never ours to begin with. Vexorum's elongated fingers curled over the armrests of his throne. His secondary hearts thumped, a slow, deliberate rhythm. Ow! They hacked our security protocols. We still don't know how they bypassed our defenses. Impossible, he hissed. Our encryption is decades ahead of their technology. They shouldn't. The holograms flickered. A transmission forced its way through Imperial firewalls with an elegance that should have been impossible. The room darkened. A single figure emerged in blue light. Commander Lysandra Kane. Vexorum had seen her before, standing quietly at the fringes of human military delegations, unassuming, watchful. A soldier, yes, but no one of importance. No political standing, no significant command. Yet here she was, addressing him directly. She didn't wear a uniform. No grand insignia or symbols of rebellion. Just a simple black vest over a fitted combat suit, an old scar running from the corner of her mouth to her jaw. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes were the kind of cold that made men hesitate before stepping into the dark. Chancellor, she greeted, you're looking well. Vexorum refused to acknowledge the pleasantry. You will return what you have stolen. Her lips twitched, but it wasn't amusement. Stolen, she mused. Strange. When you take something from us, it's conquest. When we take something from you, it's theft. His patience thinned. You cannot win this fight. That's where you're mistaken. She leaned forward, voice lowering. We've already won. A silence heavier than the void itself settled between them. And then the screens changed again. Dozens of new transmissions flooded the room. Security feeds from across the Empire, hijacked and repurposed. In every one, chaos. Entire fleets were shutting down mid-flight. Planetary garrisons were turning on each other, units dissolving into panic. High-ranking officials, those who had laughed at the idea of human disobedience, were found dead in their chambers, throats slit or heads turned at unnatural angles. Civil unrest rippled through the core worlds. Ow! Vexorum whispered. Dr. Ira Vasquez answered. She appeared beside Kane, another human woman the Empire had ignored. A scientist once confined to laboratories deep within the Empire's research facilities. She had designed the predictive algorithms that helped Imperial forces anticipate rebellions before they even began. Now, she was using those same models to tear them apart. You built an empire on the assumption that we were lesser, she said, tilting her head as if studying a specimen under a microscope. You treated us as tools, breeders, a resource to be controlled. And you did it so thoroughly, so effectively, that you never once considered what would happen if we decided to stop playing along. Kane's voice was quiet, almost gentle. We've had centuries to watch, to learn, to wait. Vexorum forced himself to breathe evenly, to suppress the tremor in his fingers. Your species will suffer for this treachery. Kane held his gaze. You don't seem to understand. We didn't start a war. A sudden shift in the transmission feed. The Empire's Grand Council Chamber. Asterisk, asterisk, its most sacred and secure hall, asterisk, asterisk, appeared on screen. The counselors lay dead. Every single one. Slumped over their desks, sprawled on the marble floor, their throats cut so cleanly it looked surgical. And standing in the center of it all was a single human woman, her hands still gloved in crimson. An aide whispered hoarsely beside Vexa. How? There were guards, security. There were, Kane agreed. But they never thought to be afraid of us. The weight of her words crushed the air from the room. The Empire's greatest stronghold had been breached without alarms, without a battle. Because they had let it happen. Because no one had considered them a threat. You never saw us, Vasquez murmured, almost sympathetically. And now, you won't see us coming. The transmission cut. The room was plunged into silence. Vexorum sat frozen. He had survived countless sieges, outmaneuvered the deadliest warlords, crushed entire civilizations under his rule. But this was something else. The enemy had already slipped past his defenses. They were inside his systems, inside his ranks. And worst of all, he had no idea what they would do next. The Empire bled, not in the way of grand battles, not in the way of planets burned to glass or fleets crushed against the cold void. It bled from within, from wounds no one had realized were festering until the arteries were already severed. Across the stars, entire sectors fell into disarray, not from open war, but from something far more insidious, precision. The humans did not charge headfirst in a battle. They did not meet the Empire's forces in the field. They did not engage in the kind of brutal, predictable warfare the Empire had spent centuries perfecting. Instead, they moved in the shadows, slipping through the cracks, unraveling the Empire piece by piece. High Chancellor Vexorum stared at the ever-growing list of losses scrolling before him. Starports offline. Communications blackouts in key territories. Military leaders vanished without a trace, their warships locked in orbit, abandoned, their crews unwilling to move without orders that would never come. For the first time in his long life, he felt something he did not recognize. It sat at the base of his spine like ice, coiled in his gut like a parasite. Dread. His subordinates, once confident in their invincibility, now spoke in hushed tones, voices raw with fear. Chancellor, one of his admirals began, the rigid composure of her species faltering. This is not an insurgency. It is something else. The others at the war table said nothing. Some stared at their screens, as if they might wake from a nightmare. Others, the more experienced among them, wore the expressions of those who had already glimpsed the truth and were struggling to deny it. Vexorum's voice was steel. Report. The Admiral inhaled sharply. Multiple shipyards compromised. Security logs show no unauthorized access, yet all classified files were copied and erased. We don't know how they did it. A beat of hesitation. And it's not just the fleet. The core worlds are shifting. He knew what she meant. Even here, in the heart of the Empire, something was happening. A sickness spreading beneath their feet, invisible until it was too late. The whispers of rebellion did not come from the usual rabble. No, they came from inside. Governors hesitating to send reinforcements. Officers disregarding orders with subtle, almost imperceptible defiance. The foundation of the Empire itself, built upon the absolute certainty of loyalty, was crumbling. They have gotten inside our minds, another officer muttered. Inside our systems. They know what we will do before we do it. Vexorum exhaled slowly. He had underestimated them. That mistake would not be made again. We still outnumber them, he said. We still command the fleets, the armies. They are a handful of insurgents operating on stolen resources. We will cut them out like rot. The officers did not look reassured, because they all knew the truth. Numbers did not matter if the enemy refused to meet them on the battlefield. Strength was useless if there was no target to strike. And the humans understood something the Empire had failed to grasp. Asterisk power was not always won with weapons. Asterisk. On a drifting warship in the outer reaches, Lysandra Kane sat in the captain's chair of a vessel that did not belong to her. It had once been an Imperial Command ship, a fortress of metal and firepower, its corridors lined with banners of conquest. Now, those banners were gone. The Imperial insignias stripped from the walls. The crew, what remained of them, served her. She ran a gloved hand over the armrest of the chair, thoughtful. Across from her, Dr. Ira Vasquez stood before a projected map of the galaxy, red lines cutting through Imperial territories like veins, marking every strike, every collapse. "This is going faster than expected," Vasquez murmured, tapping a point on the display where an entire planet had just severed its ties to the Empire. "We anticipated fractures, but this is a full-scale shattering." Kane's gaze remained fixed ahead, unreadable. They built their empire on control. When you remove the illusion of control, what's left? A quiet laugh. Panic. She turned, looking at Vasquez properly now. "How are the civilian uprisings?" "Growing. Faster than projected. They're emboldened. They see what we're doing, and they're realizing they can fight back." Kane gave a slow nod. That was the key. They were not here to burn the Empire to the ground with fire and fury. Asterisk, asterisk, they were here to let the Empire burn itself. Asterisk, asterisk. They had never needed to outgun the Imperial forces. They had only needed to prove that the Empire could be hurt. And the moment that proof existed, the moment the people saw the cracks, asterisk, asterisk, they would tear down the rest with their own hands. Asterisk, asterisk. A light flickered on her console, an incoming transmission. She pressed a button, and the display shifted to show a familiar face. A human officer, one who had once worn the Empire's colors. "It's done," the officer said. "The Capital Fleet's logistics division just collapsed. Their supply routes are severed. They'll be paralyzed within weeks." Kane exhaled through her nose. "And the defectors?" The officer's expression darkened. "More than expected. Some high-ranking. They're scared. They want an out before things get worse." "Good." Kane leaned back, folding her arms. "Give them one." Vasquez raised an eyebrow at her. "You trust them?" "Of course not," Kane replied easily. "But I trust their fear." Fear was an incredible motivator. And right now, the Empire's greatest strength, its iron-fisted discipline, its absolute certainty in its own supremacy, was fracturing under the weight of that fear. Vexorum and his kind had never accounted for this. They had prepared for war, not for collapse. And that was why they were already losing. Kane rose to her feet, hands resting on the table as she studied the galaxy map. The Empire had not fallen. Not yet. But its foundation was splitting apart. A few well-placed strikes, and it would come crashing down. "We move to the next phase," she said. "Target high-profile figures. Not for elimination." She glanced at Vasquez. "For exposure." The scientist's lips curled into something sharp. "I assume you mean their secrets?" Kane nodded once. Vexorum built his empire on obedience. Let's see what happens when his people learn exactly what they've been obeying. There was a hum of approval around the room. Because in the end, this war had never been about weapons or warships. It had never been about a rebellion of fire and blood. This was a war of truth. And the Empire had spent too long living in lies. The Empire had spent centuries perfecting the art of war. It had crushed rebellions before they could take root, silenced dissent before it could find a voice, and turned entire species into obedient subjects before they ever realized they had a choice. It had planned for every possible threat, every predictable enemy, every uprising that could be snuffed out with a fleet in orbit or a blade in the dark. But not this. Not a war with no battlefield. Not an enemy that refused to fight by the rules of conquest. Not an uprising that did not seek victory, only collapse. High Chancellor Vexorum stood in the war room of the Imperial Citadel, surrounded by the highest-ranking officers still loyal to him. Their faces were pale, their rigid composure cracking with every report that scrolled across the central display. Worlds breaking away, commanders deserting, systems slipping from their grasp without a single battle. The Empire was bleeding out, and they could not find the wound. "The defectors," Vexorum said, his voice controlled but sharp as a blade. "How many?" The silence in response was damning. Finally, The admiral beside him spoke, voice raw. Thousands, tens of thousands, more every day. A slow, painful pause. Sir, entire fleets have turned against us. Vexorum's hands tightened behind his back. The Empire had survived betrayals before, but those had been isolated. This was something different, because these traitors weren't just soldiers. They were officials, governors, strategists. Asterisk, asterisk, the very minds that had held the Empire together were now the ones cutting it apart from the inside. And the worst of it was, asterisk, asterisk, he knew why. Asterisk, asterisk. The humans had not simply attacked the Empire. They had exposed it. Every deception, every cover-up, every carefully hidden atrocity, broadcast across the stars, stripped bare before the entire galactic order. There was no loyalty where there was no trust. They had never needed to fight the Empire. They had only needed to make its people see it for what it was. A sharp chime interrupted his thoughts, and the holograms flickered. A new transmission forced its way through the encryption firewalls, bypassing every security measure like a whisper slipping past a dying man's lips. Lysandra Kane appeared before him. She looked the same as before, unassuming, practical, a soldier without a uniform. No crown, no emblem of rebellion. And yet, the weight of her presence was crushing. "You look tired, Chancellor," she said, her voice as even as ever. "You've lost weight. Your arrogance will not save you," Vexorum replied coldly. "This is not over." "You're right," Kane said. "It's not, but it will be soon." He stared at her, searching for an opening, a weakness, something, anything that could give him an advantage. She gave him nothing. Instead, she stepped aside, and another figure moved into view. Vexorum's breath stilled. A human woman stood before the camera, her hands clasped behind her back, her expression utterly unreadable. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a severe knot, her sharp eyes fixed on him with the weight of a storm waiting to break. She did not wear a rebel insignia. She wore the robes of an imperial counselor. Vexorum exhaled slowly. Impossible. Counselor Adrian Rye had been one of his own, a high-ranking official, a woman who had worked her way through the ranks of the Empire with quiet efficiency. She had spoken softly in meetings, had nodded when expected, had never once been suspected of disloyalty. And yet, asterisk, asterisk, here she stood, asterisk, asterisk. Kane tilted her head slightly, as if waiting for him to process it fully. "Did you really think we could have done all of this without someone on the inside?" A slow, spreading numbness filled Vexorum's chest. He looked at Rythe, forcing himself to remain calm. "How long?" Her lips curled faintly. "Long enough." And then, the final blow. A new projection flared to life beside them, a live feed. The Imperial Council chamber. Or at least, what was left of it. The Grand Hall was in ruins. The banners had been stripped, the once great symbols of the Empire's dominance reduced to shreds. The long, polished table where the High Council had convened for centuries was overturned, bodies slumped where the Empire's most powerful ones sat. And in the center of it all, standing where he should have stood, was a human woman, Dr. Ira Vasquez. She wore no armor. No weapon was in her hands. And yet, she had done what no warlord, no fleet, no enemy in the history of the Empire had ever achieved. She had taken the throne without firing a single shot. Vexorum felt something deep in his chest crack. A sharp, excruciating fracture of realization. He had already lost. The Empire did not need to be conquered. It only needed to be abandoned. Kane exhaled slowly, watching him with something that was not quite satisfaction, but something colder, something final. "Your empire is gone," she said. "The fleets that once obeyed you answer to no one. The systems you ruled have severed ties. Your armies are in disarray. And your people, Chancellor," she leaned forward just slightly, "your people are learning what it means to be free." The words landed with the weight of a death sentence. Vexorum stood motionless. There were no orders left to give, no fleets left to call. For the first time in his life, he had nothing. And the worst part was, he had never even seen the war begin. Vexorum had never known silence like this. The Imperial Citadel, once the beating heart of the Galactic Empire, stood eerily still. The great banners that had loomed over the war halls had been torn down, their shredded remnants drifting like ghosts along the cold marble floors. The once constant hum of strategic commands, the endless stream of officers relaying orders, the calculated pulse of imperial power, it was all gone. No one was left to command. The empire had not burned in a glorious last stand. It had not fallen in the clash of warships or the cries of dying soldiers. It had withered, unraveled thread by thread until there was nothing left but an empty throne. Vexorum sat in the shadows of the council chamber, his fingers curled into fists against the cold surface of the abandoned war table. He had been the ruler of a civilization that had spanned thousands of worlds. He had been the voice of conquest, the architect of order. Now, he was nothing more than a relic of a dead regime. A quiet footstep echoed through the chamber. Lysandra Kane stepped forward, moving with the unshaken confidence of someone who knew exactly how this story would end. Her boots clicked against the stone, measured and steady. No urgency, no fear. She had already won. "You should have fought," Vexorum said, his voice hoarse from disuse. "You should have met us on the battlefield." Kane tilted her head, regarding him like a scholar studying an outdated text. "Why? So you could have one last war." He exhaled sharply, not quite a laugh, not quite anything. "It would have been honorable." "Honor," she repeated, as if tasting the word for the first time. "You mean predictable. You wanted a war you could understand. One where you could count fleets, measure losses, and comfort yourself with the certainty of numbers." She moved closer, placing her hands behind her back. "But war is not about honor. It never was." Vexorum studied her, searching for something, hatred, vengeance, even the satisfaction of victory. But she was unreadable. "You didn't destroy the empire," he muttered. "You just stopped playing by the rules." A flicker of amusement touched her eyes. "Did you ever think to ask why your empire was able to conquer so easily?" He frowned. "Because," she continued, answering her own question, "your enemies kept fighting you the way you expected them to. They raised armies. They gathered fleets. They played by the rules of war. And so you crushed them, over and over again." She exhaled slowly. "We didn't play. We didn't give you a battlefield. We didn't meet your war machine with one of our own. We went where your fleets couldn't go. We whispered in ears that had been deafened by fear. We showed your people the cracks in the foundation and let them do the rest." She knelt slightly, meeting his eyes directly. "You were defeated the moment your own people realized they didn't need you anymore." Vexorum's jaw tightened. He had ruled by strength, by fear. He had believed, without question, that those under his control would remain obedient because they had no other choice. But the moment they saw another path, the moment they realized the empire was not invincible, it had all come undone. A slow inhale. "So what now?" he asked, his voice steady despite the hollowness inside him. "Do you execute me? Parade me through the streets as a trophy?" Kane shook her head. "No." She stood. "You're already dead, Chancellor. Your name will be forgotten within a generation. Your empire will be studied in history books as a cautionary tale, not as a legacy." Vexorum let out a quiet breath. Perhaps that was the worst punishment of all. The doors behind Kane opened. Dr. Ira Vasquez entered, her expression unreadable as always. Beside her, Adrian Rytha followed, the former counselor who had betrayed the empire from within. "It's done," Vasquez said simply. Kane nodded once. Outside, the remnants of the empire crumbled. The fleets that had once darkened the skies had either been dismantled or abandoned. The people, not soldiers, not rebels, but ordinary people, had seized what was left and began building something new. Not an empire. Something better. Kane turned back to Vexorum one last time. "You asked why we did this," she murmured. "Why we didn't just fight." She stepped toward the door, her voice quiet but unwavering. "Because we were tired of being nice." And with that, she left him in the silence of his own ruin.